Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Superhero Project podcast. My name is Danny Graydon and I am the founder and co-director of the Superhero Project, which is an academic conference devoted to the superhero genre in all of its forms. This year, at the 7th edition of the Superhero Project, we're going to be focused on the 15th anniversary of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But by doing that, we are missing out on an altogether bigger and more fundamental anniversary relating to the superhero genre, which is Superman's first appearance in Action Comics #1, which happened 85 years ago this very day. To commemorate this, Mikayla and I had a chat with Phillip Kennedy Johnson, the incumbent writer of Action Comics and therefore one of the current custodians of Superman and his mythos. An Eisner Award-nominated comics writer, Phil has also written for such high-profile properties as Aliens, James Bond, and Marvel Zombies, maintaining that with a forthcoming run on the Hulk. He's also the creator of his own series, The Fellspire Chronicles, Last Sons of America, Warlords of Appalachia, and Smoketown. However, all of that is, most impressively, a side gig to his long time and very proud service to the United States Army, where he holds the rank of Master Sergeant, and he routinely tours the continental United States as a trumpet player for the U.S. Army Field Band of Washington, D.C. Phil has also performed with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, the Moscow Ballet, the Dallas Opera, and the Benny Goldman Orchestra, amongst many others. Phil's run on Superman this far has explored some striking areas of change for the Man of Steel, not least of which is Superman's role as a father of a son, Jonathan, who is taking up his father's mantle of superheroism. Yet in the War-World saga, Superman is wholly removed from his status quo environment, up to and including his costume. During our chat, we asked Phil about the distinct challenges of writing the first and greatest superhero in their source medium, the timeless nature of Superman, the importance of maintaining the character's innate decency, his favorite moments in Superman history, the gorgeous cover art of Julian Tedesco Totino, and why Christopher Reeve is the ultimate screen Man of Steel. We had a lot of fun speaking to Phil, and we really hope you enjoy it too. So Phil, welcome to the Superhero Project podcast. It's really great to actually have a creative practitioner working in superhero comics. And obviously you're working in something that is the crown jewel of the superhero genre. Can you tell us how you first came into getting this particular very, very high profile and prestige gig?
Sure. So, Ed, well, thanks for having me first. It's been great to, be friends with you guys and finally get the chance to come on this podcast. So I was working in DC in the capacity of writing The Last God for DC Black Label, which is my epic fantasy horror book, but it was a creator-owned project. It had we'd originally thought of it for Vertigo before Vertigo shuttered, and then when Black Label came around, Black Label was supposed to be more of a darker, more standalone kind of take on the superhero characters, a place where you can do out of continuity, grittier versions of stories. We thought that Last God would be a great place for it still, even though it doesn't quite fit the mold of what the vision was for Black Label. So we did that series, which was a 12-issue, I guess technically 14-issue series. And I think that the editors that read it were struck by the amount of world building that went into that book. They actually added 4 pages to every issue just for back matter of in-world journals and sacred texts and scholarly articles that were written by fictional people in that world that never were never in panel. And when they realized they had this guy that puts 10 times too much time into world building, they're like, let's find another way to use this. So fast forward a little bit, and Dan DiDio tries to do the 5G thing, which I assume you guys are familiar with.
Yes.
But for anyone who's listening who's not familiar, that was this thing in which there was going to be a permanent timeline. So if anyone were to ask, well, how can Batman still be young when he's been around for 80 years in the comics? So it kind of establishes a more permanent, like, calcified timeline that in which Batman's 21st birthday is on this day in the 70s or 80s or whenever it was, and there it will ever be. So if you ever see Batman at age 30 with a young Dick Grayson, like that happened this year and never again. It's super ballsy move. And honestly one that I was not convinced would last. When I asked, so when are we going back to normal? The shot that I would get from my editorial was like, well, this is it. It's going to be 5G from now on. And I'm like, seriously though? And they're like, seriously, that's what we're being told. I'm like, okay, let's do this. So what they approached me about doing some, I will say this about 5G though, they brought in some really amazing people, and people were giving some unbelievably creative swings, like this big kind of burning down the forest to create new growth approach really brought about some extremely creative and really great ideas. So then at some point, I think the high ups, it might have been somebody higher up in DC that didn't care for it or something. I don't really know the details of how 5G went away, but sometime around the time of DiDio stepping away from DC, 5G also went away. But such cool ideas came out of that we wanted to use them, to use them still, but come to them in a more organic way. So it's not just like, boom, everything is new. Here's a new number one from now on. And just kind of flood the market with new series and like great ideas in which a lot of books would almost certainly get ignored. We're kind of coming to the best ideas more organically in a way that serve the stories and made sense. So for 5G, I was writing, they asked me to kind of quote unquote show run a series of cosmic books. Like there's going to be kind of a cosmic line of books at DC. Like, when you spend a lot of time writing, creating languages, like dozens of languages at once with glossaries of thousands of words each one and religions and all the stuff that we never asked you to do. Can you do that again over here for us? And so we were just thinking about how to blow out that side of the DC universe and make it this big, meaningful thing. And one of the series that I was going to be doing was going to be called War Worlds, plural. And there was going to be like Mongol was going to have a very important part in it. And I pitched them an idea for a new Mongol that was not so one-dimensional and actually like that came into his powers in a more organic way. And it wasn't just, I don't know. There were always a lot of unanswered questions to me about Mongol, and I wanted to kind of explain it all. And then there were some other books that I was involved in as well that I probably shouldn't mention because, it's possible some of those may still come to fruition, but regarding War Worlds and the rest of the cosmic line, when that all got jettisoned, my editor at the time, Jamie Rich, was telling me like we still want to do a lot of this stuff, and we really like these ideas that we had gone for the cosmic books. This particular storyline that you were bringing together makes a lot of sense as a Superman story. Would you still want to do that? Like, hell yeah, I would. For one thing, I did not think I was going to get a swing like Superman. I think at the time I was pitching something for like Red Hood, which I also love. I love that character too. But I saw myself as more of a ground level kind of writer, even while I was doing the big world building for my fantasy series, and even while I was doing the cosmic show running thing, figuring out like an overarching direction. I still thought in terms of characters like Batman and Red Hood. But when they told me I could write Superman, that just completely changed everything. Because Superman just is not an overstatement to say that Superman changed my life as a kid. Like just seeing Christopher Reeve on film as myself, a lonely kid out in the country that didn't really understand his place, didn't really feel at home, didn't know what I was doing there, and didn't know what I was supposed to do. Seeing a film about a kid like that, who discovers he is sent there by people who loved him from far away to do amazing things, and he's special and everything, all to the soundtrack, not to the John Williams score. And then he becomes this just bastion of virtue that Christopher Reeve on screen was as Superman. It just shaped my life. I mean, I became a trumpet player that plays John Williams fanfares for a living and writes Superman on the side. I get that movie just straight up shaped my life. So when I got the opportunity to write Superman, I could not believe I was getting that shot. I just didn't think I would ever have a chance like that. But when I did, I did not have a moment of doubt. I was like, I know exactly what I want to do with this character. I know exactly who Superman is in a way that whenever I see a version of Superman on the page that did not fit it, I would just immediately write it off. It's like, okay, well, that's fan fiction because Superman would never do that. He would never say this thing. He would never do this thing. Like, I know who Superman is, and with the same, certainty that people, believe in their chosen religion. Like I know who Superman is. So when I got a chance to put him on the page, it was just, I could not believe it, but I was not going to waste a second of it. So that's basically how I came around to writing Superman. It began with the cosmic stuff in 5G, and then that became the War World saga, and now it's kind of planted seeds into my plans for his Metropolis time.
It's really lovely to hear that you have such a concern with the integrity of the character. I mean, given that this is really the centrifuge of not only the genre, but the DC publishing line en masse, they obviously have a lot of concerns about how the character is presented. So when you get given Action Comics, a singular gig, if ever there was one, within superheroes, does your editor basically have a chat with you and say, right, okay, this is what you can do with Superman, but this is what you absolutely can't do with Superman? Given that you had some story ideas that were fairly radical, fairly cosmic, going to have some big changes. Do you have that conversation?
No, actually, they've been very trusting. Like I don't know if it was the work that I did on the future state issues. My first issues were technically the future state issues, and it set up Warworld Saga, and it also dealt with his children far in the future, and it painted a pretty clear picture of who I thought Superman was. And they didn't really have any notes to speak of. They liked how Superman was treated. They liked the voice, I think. Also, the way that I was hired by Jamie Rich, who has since left DC, but he has kind of an old school approach to editorial, in that his method of editing the books. Jamie's never said this to me. I don't know if this is how he feels about it, but the expression the way that I've seen him work is he seems to kind of he edits through his personnel choices. Like he's kind of envisions what somebody will do with the character, and he hires that person for that book, and then he kind of predicts how it's going to go by who's on the book. Not to say that I never got notes. There's always conversations that happen based on scripts, but there's not ever really a lot of interference in any of the ideas that I have for Superman. Like for someone saying, well, Superman would never do this. Right now, there are more of those conversations happening now because, for the War World Saga, it was important that Superman be somewhat underpowered. Not just because it would make sense for him being a gladiator. Otherwise, why doesn't he just, do his thing and just, nuclear bomb the bad guys, and he can just do anything, right? There's no struggle. There's no physical struggle. There's no him getting his ass kicked if he's at his normal power levels. But also because it was important for Grant Morrison's run on Superman of the Authority. Like that was really what was driving some of this. Like he had to be somewhat underpowered in that book. And as I've said before, I'm not going to tell Grant Morrison shit about how to write Superman. And he had very clear visions for their book, and I wanted to do something that would tie in with that. So anyway, it was important that Superman had taken a hit power wise, and that we explain all that away. But now, at the end of that book, he gets ludicrously powered up. So now he's stronger than he's ever been. And now I want to show that on the page. I want to see not just punching and heat visioning, but like how do we really show how powerful he is, and in much more creative ways, like kind of take a page out of the book of anime and show some really crazy physical confrontations in ways that make people take notice. And like really, I want to be more creative with his powers. He's got so many powers, and some of them get a little underutilized or just utilized in kind of predictable ways. So now sometimes I'll send in a script and I'll get notes back like, I don't think Superman's ever done this before in a book. And I'm like, I know, it's cool, right? And he's like, well, yeah, it looks cool, but he's never done it before. Like, I know, but here's reasons why it would work, and here's reasons why it's okay. And so we have those kind of conversations now where we're kind of breaking new ground on some of his power sets, which is very exciting to me. So that's the kind of pushback I'm getting these days. Like, I think you made Superman too powerful. I'm like, no, it's cool. And we just kind of go back and forth that way.
So I think what's interesting is that if you think about like Superman after the New 52 era, when they kind of went into rebirth, you're bringing the character back to basics. And your run on Action Comics has been very much distinguished by two, very significant changes within the character. One, obviously, is parenthood, which of course we can, discuss a little bit later on. But in the War-World saga, where Superman is taken away from that status quo in Metropolis, and very redolent, given that I've been reading Superman for a very long time, of the exile story arc from the late 1980s, where Superman is in outer space, and so when you are dealing with a storyline where the character is stripped of Metropolis and all the supporting characters and the costume, and you spoke about like knowing how Superman thinks and acts, how does that impact your writing, where you have to make sure that the character that the readers are seeing is very much identifiably Superman?
So without the costume and the supporting cast and Metropolis and the usual rogues gallery and everything, it was all about boiling it down to that phrase from Action number 1, champion of the oppressed. That was what the whole thing was always going to be. And part of that was driven, and I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't realize how much this was drawn from my own experiences, but I used to do a lot of anti-human trafficking work in Baltimore. And I just kind of thought up this idea that I thought was new, where like I wanted to, the Bendis run kind of did me a favor of killing the Mongol that we've known most recently and establishing his son as the new Mongol. And so I could kind of establish, here's how this new Mongol does business differently. And that Mongol has built a kind of cult of slavery on Warworld in a way that lets us talk about the dangers of hero worship and propaganda and this cult of personality that is a problem in current politics. A way to talk about all those things. And also there is this cult of slavery there, it adds a really interesting problem for Superman, and that how do you save people that don't want to be saved, save people that don't think they're prisoners? And that was a problem that I faced when doing anti-human trafficking stuff a lot. Like these are people who have lost everything in their life, who have been robbed of everything in their life by their slaver, by their pimp usually. And they don't see it that way. They don't think they had a pimp. They think they had a boyfriend. And that once they just get enough money, they're going to get married or whatever. Like they were kind of brainwashed and kind of under these people's control, but they didn't think that they were. And I once heard from a victim who had somehow miraculously kind of gotten out of that life. She said, if the cops had kicked down the door in the middle of the night, put a gun to my trafficker's head and asked me, "Are you being trafficked?" I would have said no.
Right.
And to me, that was just heart-wrenching to hear. I'm like, it just made us feel so helpless. Like, well, what are we even doing this for? Like, what are we supposed to do? It's just this long game it's very, very daunting. And I wanted to see how Superman would deal with a problem like that. I want to see him fly to a world of slaves that worship Mongol and fight Mongol while they all chant for Mongol to kill him. Like, they're his slaves, but they hate Superman. To them, Mongol is Superman. And they have this whole, value system that's been beaten into them over their whole life there. How do you save people like that? So that's kind of the question that I wanted to answer with Warworld. To me, setting up Superman as the true champion of the oppressed on a planet where everyone is oppressed, all fighting against him. How does someone like Superman win hearts and minds and turn everything around, all around him? And anyway, that's what I wanted to see. Champion of the Press was kind of the mission statement of the Warworld saga. I wanted to see that that chain that everyone wears and is so proud of. Like, how does Superman break chains? There's all this iconography of Superman breaking chains, usually across his chest, like, boom, I can break all these chains. Usually he's in chains and he's breaking through them, but I envisioned him with a John Carter of Mars kind of like sword and shield, but the sword that doesn't break flesh, it breaks chains. and there are all these, I know this is the longest answer ever, and I'm sorry I'm going on so long, but the champion of the press is the mission statement. But there are also these other just keystone things that have to be in every issue. Usually I wanted some very concise line that Superman would speak that could be the takeaway from that issue for readers. Something like at the end when he's just been beaten half to death and he's in the dungeons, and Midnighter's like, we followed you here. We're the ones who came here and risked our lives for this, to save these people all hate you. Are their lives really worth more to you than ours? And he says, no, not more, but not less. There always had to be some just minimal line that people could walk away from. But there's another one where he's like, now these people cheered for us to, cheer while we were getting killed. These people were cheering for us to get killed. And Superman's like, well, what should we do then? Like abandon the people who don't cheer for us? Is that what our heroes taught us? There's these moments that just teach us who Superman is and who we should be.
I think it's really impressive and also comforting that you in a story happening around this time of the character's existence, 85 years in, that you have this central theme that harks back to the very, very first issue of Action Comics #1, and that position of Superman as champion of the helpless and oppressed, because I think in the decades since, that can sort of get very much lost in amidst the expectations of kind of like the spectacle and the super heroics that level of social responsibility, even on alien worlds. And I think that's a very impressive part of the storytelling and the world building that you've been engaged in.
I was going to say, I think it's very interesting that you say that you always thought of yourself as a more grounded, down-to-earth writer with characters like Batman and Red Hood in mind, because despite Superman being on a different world, an alien environment, that story is so grounded in reality. Like you said, there's people being trafficked in real life that can draw parallels with the theologians and the people on Warworld. There's so much about Superman's response that is incredibly informed by the character over those 80 years. So it's very touching story. Even the short story you did just before, The One Who Fell, with John and Clark going off to visit a friend. There are so many grounded moments through that it almost gives him that timeless quality once again.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it's excuse me. It's you have to have those moments of great detail, right? Like when if you're telling a story, if you want to make people feel it and feel like it's real, there have to be these moments of extreme detail that make it feel like a real thing. And one of the moments that, and I'm constantly trying to make it feel like the Christopher Reeve films. I mean, I know those movies are not like without flaw, but Christopher Reeve's portrayal of Superman for me is peerless. Like the way that he embodies that character, he just makes you feel so great. I mean, like every decision he makes is, it just teaches me who I want to be.
It's interesting. I mean, I concur with you completely about that. My own genesis of reading Superman, I've been reading Superman comics for 45 years at this point. And actually, that my first experience of the comics was roughly around the same time as Superman the movie in 1978. And I think because I was very young at that point, but I think in my mind, the fact that the comics and the film melded together perfectly. I mean, one of the things they say about Christopher Reeve is that, it was literally that Superman walked off the page and onto the cinema screen. And I think in my childish mind, I sort of felt that I was looking at Superman as a real person. And so when I watch, and I love Superman the movie, and indeed, even though, as you say, that franchise is not without its flaws, especially as it goes on, the one consistent element in all four of those films is the fact that Reeves' performance is so committed and so unwavering that it is very difficult to look at anyone else exceeding the integrity and honesty of that character. So when, you know, Superman says, you know, Lois, I never lie, or, you know, or he's your friend, you absolutely believe it. And it's such a simple yet unbelievably powerful statement. And, you know, I agree that the embodiment of that character is there, and how it's throughout generations now, it seems to be peerless in that regard.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it, for sure. Like in the first movie, when he's holding the helicopter in one arm and has her in the other, and he's like, I've got you, and she's like, you've got me, who's got you? And he just kind of gives her this little smile. That smile is completely without ego, or, you know, it's not like, haha, I'm awesome kind of a smile, or like, I don't know. It's like, I've seen other portrayals in which they try to make him look just like powerful and strong, and to the almost threatening. And with him, it's just like, I'm your friend. Like, you know, you don't need to worry. I'm here, and everything's going to be fine. And I love that it's just without ego. It's not about him. He's just being kind. And then when the little PSA that he gives at the end, where it's like, I hope this hasn't put you off flying. Still the safest way to fly. I wanted those moments. There was a moment in 1047 when he does the Superman thing. Like he stops the bad guy tank thing, and then he flies the family car up off, you know, back onto the bridge, and then he checks on the kid's seatbelt. And I was like, hey, everybody okay back here? And the kid tries to give him his toy, and he says, that's okay, son, you keep Flash Dog, I think he's going to miss you. And said, but you can do one thing for me though, make sure you always wear your seatbelt, just like you did today. It was those belts that saved you as much as anything I did. Just those little things that kind of make it feel like he didn't do it. He doesn't take credit for the save. He's like, you guys saved yourself because you put on your seatbelt today. And
Right.
just to let them know how proud he is of them for what they did. And just, you know, he can just fly away, leaving everyone feeling really good, not just about meeting Superman, but feeling good about themselves because of what he said. You know, those moments just kind of having the opportunity to write those moments. Like, I'm trying to give the reader chills and make them hear the John Williams score in their mind. Like, yes, Superman is like just pure good and virtue, and makes me feel like I want to feel.
I suppose, you know, when we think of especially that first film from 1978, you know, I'm always reminded of the statement that the director Richard Donner said, that, you know, the key to all of this was treating Superman like the American myth that he is. And, you know, there are artists, illustrious artists like Alex Ross, who say, like, the key to portraying Superman is to make sure that he is out of time, that he is timeless. And that basically means that he's like firmly mythological. So when you're tasked with writing sort of like, you know, the mainstream Superman comic, you know, in continuity, what are the particular narrative challenges of making sure that Superman has those kind of timeless mythological elements that can be recognized by generations?
I try to, every word that he speaks, I try to give it a little bit of weight if possible, like something like you know, people ask me who I read as like inspiration for my version.
Mm-hmm.
And the answers are not like necessarily a Superman of a particular era or by a particular writer. I read like Pulitzer Prize journalism, or some of the greatest speeches by our civil rights leaders, or by Franklin Roosevelt, or, you know, words that carried great weight, that made us feel good about who we were, or who we could be, you know. So yeah, that's I try to find that kind of writing and get across the same weighty, but also just positive and optimistic and hopeful kind of language. So yeah, just those concise moments, and moments that always make us feel like he cares about us without feeling like, but they still have to feel like real conversation. I don't want him to come across like fakey, like a politician speaking to an audience in a way that sounds like he's on the election trail, but like we're getting really like something very powerful from somebody who loves us, you know.
With that in mind, I sometimes feel that one of the challenges with Superman, because obviously, you know, you will be a temporary custodian of the character in the writing you're doing, but I think there's a general pressure with Superman where people make the assumption he's too good, and that means that he's boring. So they have to infuse any representation of the character with this kind of edge and grittiness that I actually don't think really fits with the character.
That's completely the wrong approach. I'm sorry, please ask your question. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That I would agree that there's kind of like, Superman doesn't really do that. So how do you, in your storytelling, you make sure there's like the necessary drama and, might have aspects of sort of grittiness to it, as it, I think, is expected in the superhero genre now, but also making sure that, Superman maintains that integrity and is not doing anything that audiences and readers just don't recognize.
Yeah, there can be grit in the story, but it can't come from Superman. That's just, you just can't. I rail against that approach. I hate that approach. In fact, there's if you'll give me like 10 seconds, I'm going to pull out a comic from a recent issue that I think kind of explains my take on that. Sorry, one moment. This is 1051. This is the beautiful Fornes metallic.
I have that exact cover right here.
And actually, this cover actually kind of sums up the whole grit thing. Like, this is a super dark Cronenberg kind of take on Metallo. That's where the grit comes from. Like, we're establishing this new kind of QAnon messed up political movement in Metropolis. We see Metallo in this really dark, mentally ill kind of version of himself. But then you see Superman facing him, and like at the very end of this issue, Superman, like he's blowing up this building, Metallo is, and Superman and the super family jump in to try to save it. So bad stuff is happening. There's a lot of drama and angst in the story, a lot of physicality, a lot of visual craziness happening. And then you hear Metallo, Superman, I know you can hear me. He's not on panel. Follow my voice. Let's get this over with. And Superman's like, Metallo? Metallo says, you probably think this is about revenge or something stupid like that. It's not. I was good with running out the clock, letting my sister have some kind of life, but you had to do your stupid self-righteous hero thing, and now she's in trouble because of you. You break things, same as me. Now I've got to kill you for it. So you see all the grit, and there's this great image of him, like just a little more, like just a more complex, still basically humanoid in his silhouette, but more, cosmic and scary in his appearance. And the more, as you see him more and more throughout the series, you see him losing his grip on reality and what's really there. He's got this digital version of his sister in his head, and he's not sure if she's even really there or who he's really talking to. The grit can't come from Superman. I don't want to see a Superman that's broken in the same ways that I am, or that's flawed in the same ways that I am, or that makes the same dumb mistakes that I do at work or as a parent or whatever. I want to see somebody who shows me the way. People should walk out in Mark Miller's words. You should walk out of a Superman movie feeling like $1 million. You should be inspired. I want to feel that same inspiration I felt as a kid, where I went into the film feeling lonely and confused and kind of lost and kind of frustrated. And then I saw that movie or read a comic that I like, Superman 400, that also spoke to me very clearly, and walked out of it feeling like I'm going to be amazing. I'm going to save everyone. Like, I'm here for a reason. I'm here to do great things. I am capable of great things.
I suppose there's a fragility, isn't there? I remember talking to Paul Levitz, the longtime DC president and publisher, who said to me that with Batman, you can do anything with him. He's very, very malleable. It's just one of the hallmarks of the character. We're quite curious too, that any situation, any time, any circumstance, he just works. But with Superman, there's a fragility there that, as elementally powerful as the character is conceptually, as soon as you start to bend him even a little bit, the magic starts to dissipate very quickly. So that can actually, I suppose, present some quite interesting challenges, and constraints in terms of how that character is written, because you don't ever want to lose that magic. And I suppose that brings me back to thinking about Warworld, where, you know, you are stripped willingly of, you know, those certain status quo elements, but you can absolutely make sure that the character sounds and feels very real, and, you know, exactly the Superman we know.
Yeah, he needs to be the best of us all the time. And not to say that he can never make a mistake. He does make a mistake on War World. He underestimates the new Mongol. Mongol is just so unbelievably prepared. He created the Star Forges that now power War World, like these artificial red suns that power the entire planet, like in part just to prepare for this one battle. You know, he's so prepared, and Superman did not expect him to be that way. And then Mongol further goads him into being angry by paving the road with the bodies of the Philosians, and just, you know, just filling Superman with just this regret and guilt and sadness, and goads him into that fight. You know, he made a mistake, but it was not a moral failing. You know, we can't see Superman, you know, lose it and do something he would never do, or say some douchey thing that inflates his own ego, or, you know, just can't be that way. He's got to inspire us all the time at every turn.
How do you feel that the comics of Superman fit into that pantheon of representation? Because you've obviously got the films. Now, Superman at the moment is kind of like in limbo. There's James Gunn is doing Superman Legacy, I believe it's tentatively called, for like 25. You've got Superman and Lois on the CW that gets a lot of enthusiasm. But, you know, they are sort of different representations. I mean, the Henry Cavill Superman, he was a very great looking Superman, and I think there was the intention there, but I think that the material that Henry Cavill was given didn't allow him to perhaps be a Superman that would be as widely recognized. Indeed, I always thought that Man of Steel from 10 years ago really was kind of like taking the Batman Begins template of the Christopher Nolan film and simply grafting Superman to it, with all the tonal implications that has. And I think you ended up with a Superman that people struggled to recognize, and that, you know, to follow on from what you were just saying, you know, seeing a Superman who is dour, even depressed, conflicted. You know, if we see that in Superman, then that it's almost like it prompts a sort of an anxiety in us, because, you know, what hope is there for us? How do you feel about things like that?
Yeah, I mean, every time I talk about Superman in film, I always get lit up by somebody online, because, you know, somebody else feels differently. There's a generation now that, you know, their generation Superman movie is Man of Steel. Yeah. And there are things in Man of Steel that I admire very much. I think Zack Snyder is at his best as a visual storyteller. I think everything in the films, Man of Steel and BVS and Justice League, look amazing. Everyone looks just like they should. I think every character, every setting looks incredible visually. But yeah, and I also understand that we're seeing Superman as his character is formed. We're seeing Superman on an arc where he becomes Superman, basically. So throughout that arc, he watches his father die and he lets him die. He kind of struggles with whether or not he should save people, whether he's here to help, or if he should just hide and do his own thing, live out his life. Jonathan Kent, who in the comics should be his moral compass, alongside Martha, is the one trying to keep him hidden. I mean, like, no, don't show anyone what you can do. You shouldn't be a hero. And Zor-El kind of becomes the only father that really matters in that way. In the way, you know, like, you're sent here to do great things and you should. And Jonathan Kent's like, no, you shouldn't. Like, that kind of becomes the conflict. That doesn't make sense to me. To me, he his genetic, his physical and historical legacy comes from Krypton, but he becomes human through us. He learns his compassion and his moral center from the Kents. So that was something I struggled with in the book, in the movies myself. And also Henry Cavill's portrayal is so sometimes can be very aggressive. Like, he seems very like, I am all powerful and I'm gonna fuck you up, kind of like. It's just so aggressive. And I guess I need it to not be that way. I need to see Christopher Reeve floating outside the window, like, general, do you want to step outside? Kind of a like an almost corny firmness, but not, you know, not a relishing of violence, you know, like I can't wait to, you know, you're gonna, oh sorry, I keep wanting to say profane things.
I'll go for it. I'm the one editing.
Like I'm gonna make you shit your teeth, kind of a look that I just don't want to see from Superman, man. I want to see him like from Superman, it should be more of a like, I can't let you do this.
Yeah.
You know, like a firmness, like I can't let you do this. I can't wait to knock your face in kind of a thing. It just bothers me, I guess.
You mentioned when you were talking about Man of Steel about the notion of you know, the father figure, like via Jor-El or John Kent. Your run on Action Comics has obviously embraced one of the aspects of the character, the new developments in the character, which is Superman as a father. It's quite interesting within the superhero genre that there's almost like a pushback on superheroes being in situations where they are domestic. I remember, you know, Joe Quesada talking about, you know, Spider-Man never should have got married, it can get settled down. Whereas actually, I felt that when Superman became a father to John, it was like such a stunning development for the character because it allowed for this new burst of goodness and care, an elevation of those core tenets that I think made the character more approachable than he had been for, say, 20 odd years. And a lot of that had been sort of very much, you know, made more aggressive in the New 52. But to see Superman take on that mantle of responsibility, I felt was, you know, a quantum leap forward in terms of how he's perceived. And it fit him so beautifully. Now, obviously, when you took over Action Comics, you know, you had this family dynamic, the father and the son dynamic with John. How did that impact how you feel about Superman as a character? And, you know, what did that mean in terms of the storylines and the challenges that would be presented? And I say challenges very specifically because, you know, there's always a lot of complaints about how Superman can beat any physical challenge because of his strength. And actually, the biggest challenges that Superman faces are emotional.
Superman becoming a father in the comics almost made the task of writing him just too easy. I mean, it does fit him so well. And as a father of a young son myself, it was just so perfect. I mean, I could just pour all my love for my own son into the story, into the writing. Yeah, like John kind of becomes the vessel for all the love that Superman has for all life. You know, like you see how just how taken he is with his own boy and all the love he shows him. And I don't know, it's just this beautiful thing that I'm so glad that it's that way. It just feels good, man. It feels good for Superman to see Superman as a father. God, beyond that, the challenges, I mean, the challenging aspect is the age up that happened before I came aboard. And how that changed everything, not just to the fandom, but my own approach as well. Everyone kept telling me to undo it. And for one thing, I'm confident editorial would have said no, like for all kinds of reasons. I mean, one of them is that they already had these plans in place for John's development, and that we were using them in all kinds of different places, and all kinds of different books, and we couldn't just blow up all those other storylines. But for better or worse, John was already locked in as this new version of himself. But that complication gave us opportunities to tell a lot of really interesting stories. And I wanted to see Superman and Lois. Now Superman and Lois now have this trauma kind of that, you know, colors their character, makes their characters more complicated. In the way that, you know, Spider-Man's loss of Gwen Stacy or of Uncle Ben might impact him, or you know, the time when Batman was crippled and had to learn to walk again so he can, you know, take his city back. That sometimes the character has this part of their history that impacts everything going forward. And Superman's mourning of those lost years with John brought him the Super Twins. You know, when he was on Warworld, finding these kids that are roughly the same age as the years he lost with John made him very helps make him very attached to these kids and very protective of these kids, even more so than he would have been, and helped them all get very close. And now we have these kids back on Earth, and we're seeing these kids. Now we get the story about refugees and about trafficking victims, and and kind of like former child soldiers, and how those people learn to survive, in a first world society after having done these horrible things. Like, how do they adapt? How do they grow? How do these people who are not of Superman's lineage kind of take on this new mantle? It just gave us an opportunity to tell a much more complicated, more interesting story, I guess. And we see Superman change and grow in a way we usually get. Usually with comics, like these legacy characters like Superman, Batman, whoever else, for the most part, these stories are about the illusion of change. Like Superman's electric now. There's a red Superman and a blue Superman. This is the way it's always going to be, knowing that it will certainly go back to normal. Or like Thor is now a woman, or Steve Rogers is now old, and Sam Wilson is now Captain America forever. Steve Rogers will never be Superman again, or Captain America again. But really, it's just to make the story interesting as decades of story continue to be told. It's like these big crazy shifts in storyline that get undone or find their way back. Somebody gets killed, somebody gets married, somebody's born, whatever. It's all kind of comes back. But this is a way that we actually got to develop Superman's character and see who he is, and see how he actually adapts to this crazy thing that has happened to him. So it was, it was a great opportunity, honestly.
I suppose as well that, with Superman having a family now, it's not so much with, Superman representing a certain type of heroism, that mantra of truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. There's also one eye on legacy as well, what comes after you, and making sure that like the values that you represent are taken forward by your sons and daughters. And I think that's an interesting facet for Superman to be focused on, making sure that these new aspects of his life, his future, essentially. I always love those moments where you will see another character like wearing a version of the Superman costume, and he's always very careful to say, if you're wearing that symbol, you got to represent what it means, rather than it's easy to wear it. And I always like that, because Superman clearly has an awareness of what that symbol, the shield, what it represents morally, and I think that's actually interesting to have that refracted into these children.
That's why I think it's very sweet when I think it's in Warworld Apocalypse or 1046, where they're saying, well, we have nowhere to go once this is over. And he looks at the kids and says, look, you've got a place with us, and this shield is yours for as long as you want it. He's essentially bequeathing them that legacy.
Yeah, he's seen that they've already earned it, and just who they are and the strength that they have, and the things that they've done, everything they've been through. Like they've earned this, they've earned a place in my house. And it just shows how attached he's grown to them, and how part of it is like his own perceived loss of John's years, and part of it is just how much he admires the kids and has come to love them.
So with the Warworld saga over, and obviously we're now back on Earth, there's a recent series, I think it's Joshua Williamson, that's just started, and it didn't escape my attention, by the way, that the logo on that particular comic happens to be the original Ira Schnapp one that was seen in Superman the movie.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite interesting. When I see that, it passes up a very specific message, I think.
Yeah, that was the intent. Yeah, I mean, Josh has a very clear vision of what he wants to do with the other book. He's a big fan of the animated series, and I think that tone comes through in that book. The tone of mine is obviously very different. I lean a little darker, but it's more in keeping with maybe not necessarily the films that exist. The tone is a little more serious and dark so far than the original films, but with Superman being more of a Superman from the originals. But I'm really excited for this next arc too, man. It's going to be I probably shouldn't I shouldn't spoil, but it's I'm trying to make each arc something that really contributes to the mythos and just builds out the world of Metropolis a little more. While Josh is focusing on Superman alone, I want to show more of the city and the super family and where things are going to go. Because before he goes off to Warworld, John asks him in the John Kent book. John asked him, why don't you do more? Because he recognizes that Superman can do more, and I think a lot of readers were surprised by that question, including myself, actually. But it was in the story, so I was like, well, how would Superman react to that question in the long game? So when he comes back from Warworld, and he sees, at the time in the books, when he came back from Warworld, the real world was in this crazy, like the world was actually burning. Like when he comes home from Warworld, all this crazy political violence and just bad things happening everywhere. And in the book, Superman is struck by how quickly things have gone poorly. And he says, John was right. Like, it's time to do more. We're going to show the world, rather than, be the authoritarians that show how things are going to go now. We're going to inspire the world, show them what we can do when we work together and, follow science, have a common goal, and all work together to make things great. And they kind of make Metropolis the true city of tomorrow, using technology from Krypton, from Warworld, from things that they've learned from the United Planets. And with Steelworks, with John Henry and Natasha Irons kind of leading the way as engineers, they're creating this new Metropolis, bringing the whole family together. And there's going to be a lot more of that. There's going to be more development of the city, more development of the family, new threats that have been very carefully, subtly seeding in over the years.
I suppose it's interesting, given your focus on world building and the changes that are happening in Metropolis that are clearly venturing into the realms of like the science fictional, which I think is entirely fine, because I think a lot of people forget that no matter how much realism audiences want to have infused into the superhero genre, Superman was always a construct of science fiction in the 30s. In terms of what are the burdens, do you think, of realism within the superhero genre? And do you pay due attention to that, or do you just sort of, clearly, as you have been doing, embrace the cosmic, embrace the science fictional, because this is what really where the character thrives most?
I'm embracing the cosmic and science fictional for sure, and the key is to also add in little details of realism that make it feel real. An example would be, let's see, like when Tracy Corbin visits Metallo in prison. And he's been, my first question when we show Metallo again, so he's in prison, and I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, how would you keep someone like Metallo in prison? And like, well, they can't just put him, if they try to make him just a brain in a jar, then they would face lawsuits for, civil rights issue. Like he can't just keep somebody without a body. That's horribly inhumane. So what if they gave him a body, like a mechanical body that's just super weak and lame, like a crash test dummy that he can use to kind of get around and do basic stuff, but not really be a threat? And I imagine Metallo trying to escape and just being a big hassle and beating his arms against the walls and screaming until he's just kind of turned himself into like junk.
Hmm.
So he's just this really sad, pathetic, broken puppet in his room. And Tracy comes in and visits him and is trying to be nice to him. And she gives him some books. Like, the guy said, Tony, the guard on this floor, said that you can still read. So I wanted to bring you some books. The one on top is kind of funny. There's these little like real life things that people might say to each other. So just this attention to how, like, asking a lot of questions and answering them with more questions, and just really going down the rabbit hole of how real things could be, while still in the framework of this sci-fi craziness. So we've got this sad woman speaking to this broken, horrible looking puppet with, eyes hanging out, but with a brain inside that can hear her, talking about, which paperback book he might like the best. Those little elements of realism, of detail, hopefully make it feel real and help the reader get invested in these characters. So it's not just big vague things all the time.
And there's also something as well that's very compelling about seeing Superman viewed by the people on the ground. like in the citizens of Metropolis. They live in this wonderful city, and they have this godlike being who's kind of like swooping overhead. It always reminds me of that lovely little bit in Superman Returns from, or is it like 16, 17 years ago now,
Yep.
where you basically see Superman just swooping down like one of the main streets in Metropolis, and you just hear that whoosh and people sort of looking upwards, and it's just one of those moments where you're not sort of like got the spectacular flying shot of Superman, it's people on the ground like looking up. And
Exactly.
I always thought that was a really nice augmentary aspect to it. One thing I did want to ask you, because I'm a big fan of this, is that your run on Action has been bestowed with a really, really great set of variant covers.
I know.
By is it Julian Totino Tedesco?
Yes, during War World Saga, a lot of the variants were by Julian. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, his artwork is fantastic, and if you're a longtime Superman fan, that you can clearly perceive that his version of the S Shield is very obviously Christopher Reeve, and one cover was clearly George Reeves from the 1950s incarnation of Superman.
Yeah.
How does it feel for you as a writer being able to have that that visualized representation of the covers on such a tremendous run? I mean, that must be a real thrill, because they are beautiful pieces of work.
I know, it's such an honor, man. I just to have those. I mean, I don't decide who does the variants. That's all editorial. I mean, I could, if I wanted to be a hassle, I could try to get invested in it and try to throw my weight around, but it's mostly up to editors, and they're doing a great job. I don't feel any need to even ask for anything. I did introduce them to Steve Beach, the guy who's doing the A covers right now, because that dude's a genius.
Oh, his work is stunning.
Oh my God. Yeah. Someday just finding that guy is going to be my legacy. Like, Steve is a legit mad genius who can just do unbelievable things. That aside, Steve aside, I have not had very much input on covers, and I'm just thrilled with how they turn out always. Like just this Metallo one, man. God, I love this so much. I love all of Tedesco's. I mean, my wallpaper on my phone is,
yeah, got that one.
Yeah, is Superman and John cover with the little dog and everything. I felt like Julian did that for me specifically. The fact, because that was one of the that might have been the first cover I actually saw for my series. And I don't know this to be true, but I suspect that Julian got into like my social media and saw all the stuff with my son and did it for me personally. I mean, it could not speak to me any louder than it does. So that's the image I see every day. And it also represents who Superman is so clearly and what he means to the world.
That's a very interesting point, isn't it? Because if you were old enough to have been reading the comics in sort of the 70s and 80s, you know that the comics cover all represented a cliffhanger that would be sort of dealt with by opening the book and reading the comic inside, whereas now all these variant covers allow for a little bit of representation of the character's illustrious history, but also getting to grips in a single image of what that character is. And that image you just showed us on your phone of a young child in as we all did, I think, get a towel around your neck or your long coat and then just basically swoop around a playground with your arms out. It's that sense of imagination and how you become Superman via that very primal route.
Yeah, no, it's having those images associated with my run is such an honor, and it's not lost on me how important Superman is to people, because I remember how important he was to me. So I try to honor that with every issue.
I'm remembering the first time I saw that specific cover, the one with the child with the cape around his neck. And you're right, it does represent so much of the character, but it does, having spoken to you previously, it does almost feel like it is for you. But at the same time, I can imagine so many people coming across that cover and going, I remember doing that as a kid, or thinking of their children running around doing the same thing. It's strange how many of those Tedesco covers, and even Riccardo Federici's covers when he was doing some of the War World stuff, really hammer in Superman, and Steve Beach, of course, is doing it now. They hammer in what Superman is at his core, even when it's not doing an action pose. There is so much about that character that comes through in his caring nature that essentially a cover is someone having to attract them to the issue. And partnering those covers with your run, it feels like what you're getting on this cover, this representation of Superman, is what you're going to get in the story, a timeless interpretation of him.
Yeah, there were a lot of covers that Julian did that did not necessarily tie to the events in that issue. Sometimes it was just like, even while he was on War World, I mean, he would kind of lean, like there was one of Superman kind of leaning forward with like handing something to Lois, or let's see, maybe.
Yeah, it's the newspaper where she's sort of
right
around him.
Yeah, right, and he's like hiding a bouquet behind his back or something.
Yeah,
it's just so there's nothing like that in the issue, but it just sums up who Superman is. It's just this, God. It's just so great, like just an iconography kind of approach to the characters to remind everyone who he is and how this character makes you feel.
Yeah, I mean, two of those covers,
like impressionistic, like emotionally impressionistic approach to covers instead of like, here's what's in the book.
Yeah, I mean, two of those covers, I mean, there's one that Julian does where Superman's like smashing through a wall, and in the foreground you've clearly got gangsters sort of getting their guns ready to go. And then there's obviously another one where Superman is lifting a tank above his head, and it's clearly sort of like that S from the 40s.
Yeah, it's an old,
like, he even says like Normandy underneath.
Yeah, it's like a signed photograph of him lifting a tank in World War II.
And I suppose another very interesting bit of Superman history that was infused into the War World saga is that when Superman has his barbarian outfit, the S is obviously it's the Kingdom Come S.
I know.
First designed by there you go. Got the action figure ready to go. So the Kingdom Come S that was obviously originally designed by Alex Ross for the series of the same name, but God, 27 years ago now. Wow. How did you sort of come to that? Why was that a choice? Because was it basically a way of sort of symbolizing a sort of other Superman, as it were?
Yeah, I think that the Kingdom Come, for me, the Kingdom Come S represents an almost Elseworlds kind of approach to Superman, but also like the black background also kind of represents the slightly more grim take of Superman, but not, I don't know, grim is not the right word. I mean, it can be, but
maybe mature atmosphere,
like an older Superman too. Like it's just, we were seeing an older Superman, some gray, and in darker circumstances. And to me, it just kind of fit for that particular story. I don't know. I just felt like the right choice. It was almost like an instinctual choice.
So in terms of your run on Action, do you have an endpoint in sight, or is the diktat from DC at the moment is like, go for this as long as possible? However,
right now I'm going as long as they'll let me. There's been no discussion of jumping off the book yet.
Brilliant.
They're happy with my work, and hopefully sales will continue to be fine. And I think there's been a lot of attention on the Superman books, and I'm hopeful that sales will continue to rise. Honestly, I don't ever really think about sales much when I'm doing these kind of things. I try to do my part and signal blast things when they're on final order cutoff and things like that, and send emails to retailers now and again. But as far as like just pouring over the numbers, I have to ask every time to get them anyway. I don't necessarily see the numbers. I find out through my editor usually. I try to do great work. I try to do work that moves people and let other people do their own jobs and sell the thing. I'm thinking more in terms of the long game as far as the legacy of the book, and trying to tell a full arc that really matters to people as well as just individual issues. I have learned a little bit about the serial nature of comics and how I try to put something of note in every 20-page chapter. If that means bringing out a beloved guest star or some big impactful event or something like that, something that really makes people notice every issue and not just the run. And that's something I have had to kind of get used to, and I'm still kind of coming to grips with it because I'm just trying to tell the best story I can. I tend to think in longer arcs, but I'm trying to do what I can to make every issue really fun for its own reasons as well as its place in the arc.
I suppose, there's a lot of pleasure to be gained as a fan from, when you have an artist or a writer do like a sustained amount of issues. I'm thinking like, in Superman, it would be like John Byrne in the late 1980s. Grant Morrison did that massive run on Batman via like the Court of Owls, not the Court of Owls, Batman R.I.P. And the rest of that. I think that's actually more satisfying as a reader, because you feel that you can actually immerse yourself in that kind of storytelling, rather than, I think, what has happened to DC maybe in the last 20 years, that it gets very sort of choppy and you feel that there's no story to really get to grips with. I actually prefer that. I mean, my favorite run of Batman, for example, is the Alan Grant, Norm Brayfogle run that was like 87 through to like nearly 95. So which really took me through, I think, like the ages of like, what was it? I was in 13 through till 22. So obviously had a huge impact, and I felt the same way about the John Byrne issues, which is why when DC did those 4 collections covering Man of Steel in 86 through to when he finished off, it feels like it's a wonderfully nostalgic part of your life where you were like really immersed in the character.
I know. Yeah, I feel the same way. I want that consistency. It would be amazing to have like a long run on the book and just have this very clear statement that, I mean, I love revisiting a lot of the Rogues Gallery and kind of making them more complicated and interesting. And some people who, like Mongol, who to me was kind of one-dimensional, he's been a part of, like, Mongol's been a part of some very like some of the greatest stories, obviously, like Man Who Has Everything and some other, and Death of Superman. But his motivations are still kind of not necessarily established. Like, why are you such a dick all the time? Like, it doesn't really say. He's just kind of what he is. I want to know what he wants, and this time I wanted to see what Metallo wants. Like, why did he become this way? Like, who is he? Not just, I mean, we know how, at least in the New 52 version of events, like, we know why he is a robot, but why is he who he is? Why does he want the things he wants? And I wanted to show his real origin, like how he became a violent man, how he became a killer. And so this story is going to tell that now. And I'm going to try to do the same thing with other characters, and introduce some new ones too. In the next arc, I get to introduce a new villain that I'm very excited about, a whole new, not just a single villain, but a new, greater threat that the superfamily will have to face. The sort of the mission statement of this arc now, of this larger arc, is family, like the super family, House of El, and how, what their legacy will be and how they're shaping the city. So we're going to see other quote unquote families kind of that they have to face off with.
I mean, you're doing such great work at a time where the character is now 85 years old, or will be by the time this podcast comes out, and dealing with such interesting dynamics with the character. And yet, you deal with characters like Superman who have what you might call transmedial presences: TV, film, animation, the comics, etc. And the comics are the source material, and yet there's a sort of sense that, obviously they're not as high profile as, say, like a big blockbuster movie, etc. What do you feel, as a writer of Action Comics incumbent, what do you feel is like the importance of that source material in terms of the character? We're not in a period of time of history anymore where, comics like Superman 75, The Death of Superman, sold like 5 million copies. We're not in that period anymore where you get those like gigantic sales numbers. And yet Superman, in your run and with the other ancillary comics, sales are rising. It's very, very healthy. There's clearly a sense of popularity for the character. But do you think that there's like a bigger, more fundamental contributions that the superhero comics have to make? What with all there being all of these different representations in media of them?
Yeah, all we can do is be hopeful. I have having worked on some other licensed property. When I say licensed, I mean things like Kong or Alien or Planet of the Apes or whatever. There's not people that are making the films or TV shows or anything, I've not seen anyone feel like they have to be beholden to the comics. All we can kind of do is hope that they pay attention and that they're real fans of the properties. And now that we're seeing this new period that I think will be unprecedented, like an era, I hope will be an unprecedented era of cohesion between the comics and the movies and the films or in the TV shows and the games and everything. We can only hope that they're, that they're taking the right lessons from the comics and trying to tie it all together. Because they don't have to, and I just hope that they do. And I am encouraged by seeing what a fan James Gunn appears to be. He clearly has a lot of love for the Grant Morrison books, for Tom King's books. He shared and signal boosted Action 1050, which was really cool. He has been reading the recent stuff, which is nice to see. So that's all very encouraging, and I hope that I've seen a lot of Superman writing in the past. Superman is maybe my favorite comic character, certainly the top couple, and I mean he was such a huge deal to me, and I even though he is my favorite, there are an awful lot of stories that I've read and that I don't care for at all, that I think get him completely wrong.
Okay.
And I just want the version that I know to be true, again, as the, true as a devout practitioner of any religion would see it. That's the version I want to see on screen. And I know Grant's version is awfully similar to my own.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very hopeful that's the version we're going to see on screen. If I could tell a little bit of a story I don't think I've told. I hung out with Grant a little bit in Glasgow, and we had this big conversation about who Superman is. And I told Grant about a panel I had done during COVID. It was like an online thing for a convention somewhere. And the moderator asked, sum up Superman in one word. And I kind of got caught off guard. I didn't realize that question was coming. And I think I said hope, because that's what everyone says. And I guess, but I wish I could go back and do it again. Because I mean, hope is kind of the word that everyone hung their hat on that panel. But later I was like, I wish I'd said something different, because he's certainly a character that inspires hope. But who Superman is, I think, I have two words, because the feeling that I'm trying to grasp is actually kind of somewhere between them. Compassion and humility are the two words that I think of for Superman. And I told Grant that story, and Grant said, my word would have been inexorable. Right. Or sorry, that's not true. It's not inexorable, but indomitable, excuse me, was the word.
Okay.
And I like that choice. To me, his indomitable will and drive and everything is certainly a great choice. But to me, I guess my word, like compassion / humility, is like the flip of that. Like he is indomitable, but you also have to have that other side where he can't be a god among us. He can't be. I don't want to see just it's cool, like the image in the movie where Superman is floating in front of the sun, and the person is on the top of the house wrapped up in a blanket, reaching up like, save us. That's great and a beautiful image, and that's what I want to see. However, you have to see the next thing, which is also him, checking on the seatbelt, saying the words of kindness to the kid, or a moment of extreme tenderness with his wife, or whatever. He can't be floating above us. He has to be down on the ground with us as Clark Kent, also, just being human.
I suppose with we have to wait and see with James Gunn's Superman legacy. But I think for a long time, I felt that with Superman on film, there has always been this desire to sort of overcomplicate things. And, fans, react to things like Batman versus Superman or, Justice League, and they don't recognize the character. And you'll have creatives who will say, well, it's very, very difficult to write Superman. And actually, I think, well, not if you're looking at the basics, if you understand that, which is why for a long time I felt that if DC on film really wanted to sort of get back on track, and I'm talking about all of its properties, the first thing you have to do is make a firmly classical Superman movie. Because I think if you show the audience that you get that character and you understand how they tick, everything else follows from that. But it seems like there's this weird resistance where it's kind of like, no, well, we've got to make Superman relevant to now, and it has to sort of speak to people. And it's kind of like, well, I'm not sure if that's necessary. Not everything has to be a carbon copy of, the Christopher Reeve movies, but it's almost like they feel that it's perhaps passé, maybe even immature to just have Superman be Superman. That's just my own observation. But
anytime someone says he's too good and he needs to be, you got to mess him up somehow, I think it's just gross. I find that approach just deeply offensive. And any exec that ever said like, how do we make him more like, whatever. If I hear the word gritty come out of his mouth, I'm like, you're fired, dude. Like this, you just don't understand who this is supposed to be. Superman should not be gritty. He shouldn't be sullied in any way. Superman is an oak. He needs to be this timeless thing that shows us the way. So we can put him in gritty circumstances. I would have loved to have seen a Superman like the Christopher Reeve Superman in scenarios like the ones that we saw in the Snyder films. I would love to see that character in these complicated or dark scenarios, but being that bastion of light in those situations. Like that's kind of what I'm trying to do in the books. I want to see the big larger than life crazy cosmic scenarios. It's weird. There are elements that date the movies, going back to see the kind of chuckling Lex Luthor talking about how great he is with the derpy little sidekick and the tuba theme playing, and it's like the buffoonish villains. I would like to see Superman against somebody more like Darkseid or Mongol or this version of Metallo, but still being who he is in those films. I think there's a place for that. And I was very encouraged. I did not actually see Black Adam yet, but I heard that when Superman shows up at the end, I heard they played the like bum 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 when he comes in. That's very encouraging to me. To me, that's like a statement of, we have made a misstep, and now we're going to bring back the pure Superman that the world needs.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, having read all of your issues on Action Comics, I think what's really lovely to see, alongside all the world building and the drama and the sort of personal interconnectivity that's there, is that the World Saga and the stuff with Metallo, I could see them as a film. And it's quite interesting where, we talk about widescreen comics. That's something that sort of came from Warren Ellis's The Authority in around 1999, where there was a conscious attempt to have, the superhero comic reflect the aesthetics and dynamics of blockbuster movies, which The Authority did like fantastically. But it's, when I was reading your comics, I suddenly thought, why haven't we had like Metallo on screen? It's kind of,
I know, man,
so fantastic, because they always, in the films, we know it's either Luthor or it's Zod, and they've done
one attempt at maybe bringing Brainiac.
Yeah. And you kind of think, but there are just like so many others that you could do. And Metallo is, Brainiac is obviously, another one that is just, should have happened by now. But it's, I suppose, that do you feel then that, of all the superheroes, that exist, and obviously there are thousands of them at this point, all drawn from that one character, what is it about Superman that you think sort of elevates him above and makes him resonate, even after 85 years? Because now reaching a century is absolutely assured, and well beyond that.
Sure.
What to you really is, what keeps generations coming back and being beguiled by this character? I've stumped you.
No, it's just man, it's hard to put into words, I guess. I mean, for me, it's just the purity of it, man. Like the pure inspirational thing that superheroes were initially meant to be. Like that, just the concept of the guy who doesn't have to be beholden to the same frustrations of getting kicked around that we do. He doesn't have to worry about. Didn't have to worry about. He's not limited by muggers or political corruption, or, you know, I don't know, the things that frustrate all of us. Like, why can't somebody do something? Kind of this instinctual kind of thing in the back of our minds. Like, if only somebody could just fix it. And he's this bulletproof man shows up and just fixes things. It's just this fundamental, just basic, you know, person who shows us how best to be human. I don't know. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a better answer. It's just somebody who has, he's the living antithesis. And I've said this before, so my apologies for repeating myself, but it's how I feel. The living antithesis to the cliche that power corrupts, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Just I have to believe it's possible to be powerful without being corrupt. I want to believe that somebody could have no physical limitations, or have, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars and still be purely virtuous and use it for the betterment of mankind, for the betterment of humanity in the world. You know, people want to see that it's possible to be powerful and also good and care about everyone. And he represents that. Anytime anyone talks about making him gritty or broken in some way, I'm like, nope, you're done. He needs to be an inspiration, someone who shows us how best to be human. It just makes you feel good. It inherently makes you feel good in a way that other characters don't. Even Cap, even other characters that are meant to be this, you know, paragon of virtue, almost no one can really in comics can make you just feel, can give you those same kind of electric like vibrations, like, yes, I just want to be that, you know. From the very first film where the S shield, like the 3D S shield kind of goes over your head, and, you know, you hear the fanfare, and you see, you know, just the person who's walking around like the rest of us, just a schmuck with glasses and a hat and all that. And then something happens. He's kind of meek. He kind of gets splashed in the you know, in the street when the car drives by. People kind of ignore him. And then something happens, and then the physical opening of the shirt. And it's like, now it's time to act and save people. It's time to act and do something. He just represents that so clearly. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. You know, I think that one of the observations I think I can make about, you know, culture in the last 20 years. I mean, we've seen a renaissance of superhero movies in since 2000 with X-Men, you know, exceptionally popular. You know, the MCU is now 15 years old. There is an appetite for that good versus evil dynamics. And actually, you can see that the way that is represented in a lot of the, you know, shall we say, poisonous political rhetoric and discourse that we see in society, there's something quite comforting about sort of the placement of the good guy, the superhero, you know, the evil bad guy, etc. But I think that's actually suffused with a lot of cynicism. And the reason why I think that, you know, we need sort of Superman to be back is because it is that unabashed lack of cynicism, that sense of hope, a degree of tenacity that is sort of unrivaled, and that dedication to being selfless, that's not performative, it's just who he is. I think that is something, that moral clarity is the term I would use for it, is something that I feel is what draws me back as a fan to Superman year after year. You know, I love all the flying, and I love the super heroics, and, you know, even the punching and stuff like that. It's wonderful. It's the moral clarity. And I think, you know, now that a lot of superhero fans, we're not talking about sort of 10-year-old children anymore. We're talking about people my age and your age, Phil and Mikayla, that, you know, in a world that is suffused with such cynicism, having a character who has that level of moral clarity, that seems to me to be almost like the most important element of the character. And why there is that endurance that he has to to have that kind of certainty in a way that none of us do, regrettably. So
yeah, agreed. Yeah, you're totally right. This is moral clarity. That's what sets him apart from the other superheroes. I think like it's not. I mean, hopefully they would not. All the superheroes are. All superheroes should be good guys in theory, but something about Superman just is a whole nother level where he just shows us the way. It's another. I mentioned my little touchstone things that I try to put in the books, like the concise statement that he makes that a reader can walk away from the book with. Another tenet that I try to hold to is the powers should only be there to illustrate how utterly incorruptible he is. It can't just be for its own sake.
Right.
So I want to see in every issue, I try to see him using his powers, and now his powers like more power than ever, but only to illustrate that he is not a monster. He's not a god. He is purely and utterly kind. So there's a book coming up. There's an issue coming up in which he does something that we've never seen before in a comic from Superman, something that's going to probably piss some people off and hopefully inspire others. But it's just a great show of power, more in keeping with like pre-crisis stuff. And afterwards, he's kind of teed up to do something very kind of that a bully might do, but instead he shows great care and compassion and just reminds us all this is why he's the best.
Right. I mean, I always think, when I've done lectures on superheroes, there's one sequence from Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman that I always cite as being an essential distillation of that kindness. And it's the sequence in All-Star Superman where Superman basically rescues a young teenage girl who is on the cusp of committing suicide by jumping off a building.
We talked about that one when we met.
Yes, exactly. And how, in those 5 or 6 panels, it's about, Superman just being there and offering a sort of sense of comfort when a sense of comfort might not exist in that moment, and the fostering of that. And I always think of that as being, almost like a quintessential moment. What's you, from your experience of Superman comics, like stands out as something that like really nails the character? I mean, I know you, like I and Mikayla, we have like a singular love of the film, the first film in '78. But what stands out to you as a quintessential Superman moment?
Man, well, that's the one that everyone refers to, and with great, and rightfully so. That's the one that stands out to me as well. Man, another one. There's the great one from Superman for All Seasons.
Yeah.
And this feels like another like almost cliche choice because now it's in a TV show. But the moment in which he saves a kid and he says, "Nice costume." He's like, "Thanks, my mom made it for me."
Right.
That was a really nice moment. There's a moment where they talk. There's another moment from that book where he and Pa Kent are on the porch talking. It was really sweet. Ma Kent, I guess. What's another one? There's one from Kingdom Come. That's overall not necessarily the most uplifting Superman story, but there are moments that I find really powerful. It was really visually powerful to see Superman as a farmer at the beginning when you see him for the first time. He's just a guy, he's just nailing in stuff on the roof, and then later you see him carrying the tractor and you realize who he is. That's really cool. But the moment from that book that stands out the most, I think, to me, is when there's all these meta-human douchebags in the bar, just kind of making a mess and being lame, and Superman walks in, and the whole place shuts up and turns and listens, and he puts out the call to arms, like, this is what we're going to do now. I expect more of you. You need to be more than this. Be better. And then after he walks out, someone says, like, I feel like I've just been asked to join the 12 disciples or something like that.
Yeah, I think as what came to my mind is that one character on the side says, "Man, I'd follow him anywhere."
Exactly.
And it's what the one that's coming to mind is from Paul Dini and Alex Ross's Peace on Earth from the 60th anniversary in 1998. And there's that amazing double page spread. And these are obviously treasury editions. So these are quite large images. But it's basically where you see Superman addressing the United Nations to sort of state his plans to do world peace. And it's one of those moments where you sort of see the impact, the visual impact of the costume, because of course everyone's wearing gray suits, blue suits, and pastel colors or whatever. And then you've kind of got like the sheer flamboyance and color that is so visually arresting. Everyone's eyes are on him, and he's kind of like standing there, you know, his chest sort of puffed out like this immovable pillar, and, you know, stating what he's going to do. And you almost feel it, like these are all politicians. They're all sort of very cynical and pragmatic, and they don't believe in such highfalutin, morally clear ideas. And then on the other side of the page, you've got Superman, and you kind of like, but you believe it, you know. And even though, you know, in that story, the plan falters, not actually due to Superman, but like human corruption. And he realizes that actually, you know, rather than fixing that intractable global problem, the solution is to teach via that moral goodness by farming, you know, and like make it a grassroots affair. And I always thought, when I was read that at the time, I just thought that was such a beautiful Superman way of dealing with things, of like quiet tenacity, and that actually that sort of peace on earth, it will be a very long game, as it were. But with that example and that lesson, that's how we achieve that. And I always thought that was really striking.
That is great. I actually referred to that UN scene in 1047, I believe, when the super family walks into the UN together.
Mm-hmm.
And because I love that striking blue and red. Those particular colors came back just a little bit muted, and I was like, oh man, I wanted to pop out like crazy, but still, that was, yeah, I don't know. I love seeing the contrast of the suit. Anytime Superman's flying through, I love seeing just this beam of blue and red light in the middle of an otherwise mundane looking scene.
Well, it's like going back to the first Superman movie, is like when Superman hears the hypersonic signal from Luthor that's basically, you know, luring him down to the lair. It's when Superman flies down and you get that shot of Metropolis Street and everyone's wearing those sort of dull colors from the late 1970s, and all of a sudden he kind of like lands in the middle of them, and there's just like this burst of color. It's just everyone sort of like immediately whips around and it's just totally locked their eyes on it.
I know.
And that made such an impression on me when I was really young. You know, and it used to make me daydream about what it'd be like to sort of like suddenly see Superman swoop down in real life and just everyone straight on him.
Right, I know.
Okay, so Mickey, do you want to ask a final question?
I guess it's less of a question, probably more of a getting your opinion on part of your run. We were talking about obviously how Superman sort of inspires people, and that's essentially his primary superpower, the fact that he can use all this power and still do good. There's actually a character in your run that I think probably best embodies this, and that's Manchester Black. Previously, bearing in mind, I have not read all of The Authority. I have not read every single thing that Manchester Black has appeared in. In my mind, he was always kind of a dickhead. My primary thought is back in the Tomasi run, where he's basically controlling John. Yeah. And in 1050, obviously, he is part of Lex Luthor's plan. But there's something Superman says that is incredibly striking about just the impact Superman has, even if Superman probably doesn't realize it's his impact. And it's when he's talking to Batman, he says, Manchester Black followed me to a world knowing that we might die. We're there specifically to help people when no one else would. And I think that speaks a lot to just Superman's emphasis on people. The idea that Manchester Black, a guy who Superman has every right not to trust, is there working with him for a singular good cause. And I think that's so amazing. And I was wondering, I know he's part of Grant Morrison's The Authority run, but did you have that in mind when you had to write Manchester?
I did. And Manchester Black was chosen by Grant as the character Grant really wanted to show that Superman could take any group of, like, just a super motley crew of not even necessarily superheroes as much as like metahumans. Some of them are heroes, but some of them are arguably even villains or just more morally gray. And they do kind of collectively sort of represent Superman's power set, but they also they're like a dark, more flawed version of the Justice League, kind of.
Yeah.
It's like a C team version of the Justice League that all have their own hangups or issues or have done questionable things. And Superman wants to kind of prove that he can take even this crew and turn them into proper heroes. Like he sees in them the ability to be real heroes, and he wants to show them the potential that's in them. It's like a challenge to himself and to them. And I like that, especially Manchester Black. And I loved writing Manchester Black in that light, where he was ostensibly a traitor even then, and goes on to become a true believer, because of Superman's superpower to inspire and to show us the way, to show us how to be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
So even at the end, when
Lex, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it was fun. And this showing Manchester Black's final line when he's with Lex in 1050 rather.
Yeah.
Even when he's getting in the dig at Lex with his final breath, he's still like, saying, he's kind of showing like, yeah, Superman made a true believer. He was all right in the end, and he showed us how to be what we were. So yeah, it was cool to see them kind of bond in that way.
Well, thank you for coming on, spending some time with us to talk about your really, really great work on Superman. It's been such a reinvigoration of the character, and it's a real privilege to sort of get an insider's perspective on how these wonderful stories are created. So thank you very much to Phillip Kennedy Johnson. Phil, do you have your social media where people can find you?
Yeah, I have a website, which is just my full name, phillipkennedyjohnson.com. And you can find me on Facebook under my full name. Let's see, Instagram, my full name with underscores. So Phillip_Kennedy_Johnson. And then on Twitter at Phillip K. Johnson. It's 2 L's in Phillip. And huge thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to both of you. Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And I bow to your superior knowledge of comics. I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing over there at the university, and I would love to talk to you again.
Thank you. And also for anyone interested in spies and James Bond, do check out Phil's 007 series, because it's absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much.
It really does capitalize on how great that character is. So thank you, Phil, and we look forward to talking to you again down the line.
Me too. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.